murders, but they come from China, and you know, rich man kind of they're excellent setters, so they're really good. Hey guys, welcome to James White's Fort in downtown Knoxville, Tennessee. You got to come check this out. We have come today to participate and to celebrate in Knoxville, Tennessee, the homecoming here. This is where it all began, right here with James White. There's an enormous amount of information about him, but the concentration of today was to have almost like a historic experience. So we have come today to participate and also to help educate about chickens and chicken breeds, but we want to take you around today for the sights and sounds of all the wonderful things they have here at this historic fort. So be sure to check out everything and all about them. So let's get busy and show you all the fun footage so you can see what it's like here.
Yeah, like to know anything about the militia? Probably saw the sign out front that the fort was built around 1786. And so from the 1780s, 1790s, this would have been part of the state of North Carolina, and then it became the Southwest Territory. And so territorial militia was needed. The governor's house, obviously, just over there in Mr. Black's fort here. Knoxville was the capital. We won was the territory built. So if you needed a militia to defend the territory, you didn't really have a standing army per se. So militia was necessary. Have somebody here to protect the settlement. In addition to that, there was no standing police force. And so the militia was also in charge of capturing criminals and serving as the police force. If you were between the ages of 18 and 45, typically, you would be required to serve in the militia. You were required at your own expense to provide some type of firelock, either a rifle or a musket, and you had to have at least 2 spare flints. You see that right here, there is a rock, very sharp one, that is the flint, and you would have to have 1 in it and 2 spare. This being a rifle, you would also need at least 20 ball and patches for the ball, as well as about a quarter pound of powder. And that was above and beyond what you would use for hunting. Now, some people would have also had smoothbore muskets. And if you had a musket, you would have to have 24 cartridge, and that has your ball and your powder and everything all together. And you would need the bayonet that goes with it as well. You had to have some type of edged weapon. So the muskets had a provision to put a bayonet on, the rifles did not. So as a rifleman, I would carry a knife that I could fight with, or better yet, a tomahawk. Also in terms of socializing. So it was both. Because the muzzleloader doesn't have You mean those muskets?
Back in the day, you didn't have plastic rules for that, things like that.
Piece of metal, which is not working very well.
making something in particular?
Yeah, I was gonna try to make an S hook real quick.
So we're going around. It's going to blow your mind if you come here because it is amazing what's here. So I just wanted to correct. So you can see behind, you've got Jim next to me. And inside here we have the kitchen, of course, which is back off the house. Okay, so they're making biscuits, we're making moccasins, we're making
Biscuit making and bread making back in the 1700s were much different than what it is today. In the modern day electric ovens, you have the heat that goes all the way around your bread, and it would brown the bread so you knew when it was done. When you cook over the fire, you don't have the browning on top of your bread or biscuits like you would, and so it's more of watching your bread and watching it rise and knowing what the bread looks like as far as the puffiness, and your biscuits come out much softer than they do in the modern day conventional oven. We're just going to place these around in a circle. Leave them on the fire for about, last time we did a batch of biscuits, so they were on for about 20 minutes. There we go. This is called a round griddle or a round hanging griddle. We're just going to slide it back on the swing arm over the fire. And keep an eye on them when they're done. Now, if you happen to be well off, more well off in the 1700s than others, you might own what was called a reflector oven. And this reflector oven, you would actually put your bread or your biscuits here, or maybe even your pies, and you would take it and you would put it up against the fire here. And with the heat coming off the fire, you would get the browning and the toasting the bread that's much more like what we have today in our electric ovens. But here's some biscuits from our last batch. And they turned out excellent. So y'all come on down and we'll have you some biscuits.
Go for it. Just do your thing. Yeah.
Well, back in the 1860s, Empress Eugenie, who was Napoleon III's wife in France, was the fashion trendsetter. And the ladies would look at her and try to emulate Empress Eugenie. Now, the first piece of clothing that the ladies needed were the drawers. And the drawers were just 2 legs fastened onto a laced band. They didn't have the little band elastic in their underwear like we have today. So when they needed to go to the ladies' room, you couldn't really get in under all of your petticoats and corsets to unbutton or untie. So therefore, they just got over the chamber pot and squatted. It was so much easier that way. The next piece of clothing they needed was the chemise. That's the forerunner of the slip that we have today. Now the difference is the chemise has sleeves, and the purpose is for the sleeves to catch the perspiration. They didn't have deodorants, didn't have antiperspirants, so therefore when you perspired, there were gussets sewn under the sleeves that kept the perspiration from going through onto the dresses. Now you might say, well, why didn't you just launder your dress if you were perspiring? Well, if you tried to launder your silks, they just crinkled up. You laundered in the big pots of boiling water with a lye soap. If you tried to launder your wools, they shrank. Many of your cottons were still not color fast, and the dyes would fade out. So therefore, they only laundered their work clothing, would be made out of a cotton that they could launder, and they didn't bother about laundering the other clothes. Another purpose of the chemise is to keep the boning in the corsets from rubbing against the skin. That was whaleboning, or it may be metal strips in there. Now the corpse's purpose was to help you to stand up tall. We talked about Empress Eugenie was very regal. Also, it made your waist seem smaller. It didn't make you smaller, but if you're a little bit pudgy, it just sort of holds in the pudginess and makes you seem smaller. And also the corset gives you a definite line of where your waist is, and then that's going to help hold up all of your petticoats and your cage crinolines because they're very heavy hanging there. Now the next piece of clothing you needed was the under petticoat. The under petticoat hung very close to your legs. It wasn't very nice to show your ankles and your legs, and then you had on drawers that were open at the bottom, so that just gave you a lot more privacy. Before the 1860s, to make their dresses as full as Empress Eugenie's, they wore maybe up to 10 starched petticoats. However full you wanted your dress to be, you just put on another petticoat. Extremely hot, extremely heavy. So when the cage crinoline was invented, that was a super great invention. These hoops are made out of watch spring metal. It's the same metal that's found inside the men's watch key wound watches. You would put the key in and you would turn the key and it coils up into a tight coil. Take the key out, it uncoils, and that makes the dial go around. So that same watch spring metal was riveted together, and then it's attached to cotton bands, and then the bands attached around the waist. So that holds your skirt out, lets the air underneath, it moves, and it's such a better idea than wearing so many petticoats starched. Now the lady's ready for her dress. Mrs. Lincoln today has on a sheer cotton. Sheer cottons were treated as very fancy dresses, just like the silks and the fine wools. And they could be decorated the way that you would decorate a wool or a silk. My dress is a cotton dress, more like a work type dress, and I wouldn't have the fancy decorations or anything on my dress. It would be something that maybe I could wash. Now we talked about Empress Eugenie. She had a pale, pale skin. Didn't want to get suntanned. So the sleeves would come down to the wrists. If your sleeve didn't come to the wrist, you wore another undersleeve that came all the way down to the wrist. And shears, because they were worn in the summer, were treated a little differently, but it still hides her arm from getting the sun. She would wear gloves when she went outside to keep her hands from being tanned. Her bonnet, even, if you'll sort of turn a little bit, the bevelay in the back, or I call it the curtain, comes down over your neck and keeps your neck from getting suntan. But look at the bonnet style. It does not save her face. They sit really back on your head. And so therefore, she needs something else to cover her face when she's outside. So she would carry a parasol. Tiny, tiny little silk thing. Some people say they're child's umbrellas. Well, they're not. If you put them in the rain goes right through them. They're silk. But she just needs it to keep the sun from coming on her face. So now she's ready to go. She has everything on she needs for a lady of that time.
Dressed to be a first lady.
That's right.
There you go. There you go. Thank you so much.
you.
It's awesome. Thank you.
General Robert E. Lee. I was born in 1807, January the 19th, to a Revolutionary hero, Henry Light Horse Harry Lee III. My mother, Ann Hill Carter Lee. I attended a military school, West Point. I entered in 1825. I graduated in 1829 in a class of 46, second in that class without a demerit. I was in the military, U.S. Army, for 32 years. At about that time, we had a difficult problem going on in the U.S. of A. We had the North and the South that wasn't getting along, and there was a big war broke out. It's called a Civil War, which is incorrect. There is no such thing as a civil war unless one country's wanting to take over the other. But I was offered command of the whole Union Army by Abraham Lincoln. I refused that command. I could not bear arms against my Virginia state, nor my family. I had to make a choice to either fight for the Constitution of the United States of America or for the Union. My choice was the Constitution of the United States of America. I had to make a choice, and that was my choice.
So, Mr. Lee, tell us the story about General Lee and exactly his love for animals, his love particularly for his special hen, and how far he was willing to go for her, and the whole deal about that.
Well, General Lee and his men, the Army of Northern Virginia, was going through Pennsylvania, and there was a farmer that had sympathy for the Confederates, and give them a bunch of chickens and some food to eat to help them along. Well, there's this one little hen that took up with General Lee, went to nesting in his tent at night. Lee would have to come out of the tent before the little hen would go in. He called her Nellie, and she would go in and get on her roost, and they'd spend the night together. And he really loved animals. Actually, he had a pet rattlesnake in Texas when he was there. He loved horses. Lee was a lover of animals, and he really took up with little Nellie, and she was beginning to get very, very fat. Well, Mr. Lee had a meeting with some of his generals to discuss the war situation. And the kitchen man, the cook, had nothing to cook for him. And he noticed little Nellie was mighty fat. So he slaughtered little Nellie. Mr. Lee and his generals were eating the meal that night, and Mr. Lee commented on how wonderful the chicken was and how fat it was and where did it come from.
Right.
And the cook admitted that he had slaughtered Nellie. Mr. Lee went into orbit, and he was fixing to court-martial him out of the military for killing Nellie.
So the bottom line is, you don't mess with Nellie.
Nellie.
You did not mess with Robert E. Lee's Nellie.
No, he was very particular with little Nellie.
Well, now he was known. Most people that are, he is known for, regardless of how you feel about anything, really being a gentle, loyal spirit.
He was a very, very good man, a good Christian man. He was loyal to the military. When this war come along, you know, he had to make a choice.
Yes.
He was asked to control the whole Union Army by President Lincoln, who had ordered Francis P. Blair, one of his associates, to offer him that command.
Right.
General Lee reluctantly declined that. He said, I cannot bear arms against my Virginia state,
Yes.
my homeland, or my family. And I cannot believe we have a president that would declare war on his fellow Americans. I will not take that command, and he walked out.
Right.
And a couple of weeks later, he was offered command as a general in the Confederate Army, and that's where he went. He had to make a decision. He had to resign from the military. General Winfield Scott was the man that he resigned to, and General Winfield Scott told him, said, you're making a bad mistake, Mr. Lee. You're making a bad mistake. Mr. Lee said, I cannot bear arms against my Virginia state. Although he didn't want to leave the Union.
Right.
He had principles. Virginia had already seceded, so he went with his Virginia state.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for talking with us about. I'm going to have a Nellie now. I don't have, of all my girls, I do not have a Nellie,
Well, that
but
was-
now you have inspired a Nellie.
That was what he named, Little Nellie.
Little
And
Nellie.
you can imagine, they said his neck when he got mad, his neck had turned red. They said he turned cherry red.
That was his girl.
He was mad. Little Nellie he had actually eaten Little Nellie, and he was upset.
I'd say so.
All right.
Awesome story.
Thousands of troops, both north and south, were still armed with muskets. Muskets are smooth bore 69 caliber. Calibers are hundredths of an inch, so that thing's almost 3/4 of an inch. The cartridge for these old guns, muzzle loaders, was a paper cylinder with your powder in the top, your bullet in the bottom. To load the gun, you reached into a pouch, took that, bit it off, poured the powder and the bullet down into the barrel. Then you had to withdraw the rammer, which is hard in this room to do, and ram the cartridge down. And then
Mr. President.
you had to withdraw the rammer, put it away. On the musket, on the old flintlocks, you'd already put a little bit of powder in what was called the pan.
Great.
And then that came back down. When you got ready to fire, you pulled the gun all the way back to full cock. When it went forward, it made sparks and set the gun off. Several innovations had taken place between the end of the war with Mexico in 1848 and the beginning of the Civil War in 1861. And one of those innovations that had occurred was the percussion cap, which is made out of copper and has a small amount of powder or explosive in it. It went on a cone at the back of the gun, and that is what's going to set it off. The other big innovation was we could now make a gun that had rifling in it and loaded simply and quickly. And that's because of the invention of a Frenchman by the name of Claude Monet. Now, Monet's name is spelled M-I-N-I-E. So to our Anglo-Saxon ancestors, that's not Monet, that's Mini. That's why we call this thing a mini ball. It's bullet shaped. The grooves held grease because you needed that after you fired the gun several times. The black powder residue built up. It also, originally, Monet's design had an iron plug in the back. The idea was the iron plug was jammed forward, it would catch the rifle and put a spin on that bullet. It took an American, James Burton, to figure out you didn't have to put anything back there. As long as there was a cavity, it would work. So it was a big innovation, a lot more accurate weapons at a lot longer distance. Now the men on horseback would have had a terrible time loading a big long gun down the barrel. So most of the Union cavalry, and to a large extent the Confederate cavalry, had little things that were called breech loaders. This is the Ambrose Burnside's invention. Ambrose Burnside is the Union commander here in Knoxville in the fall of 1863. To load it, he made a special cartridge that looks to me like an ice cream cone, and it all had purposes to it. To load it, you push this down, you drop the bullet in. Whereas with a lot of your breech loaders, they would start leaking gas because they'd wear. The flange on this, when it got closed up, made a gas seal. It was a much better idea than anything else they had at the time. They also at this time had a invention that had been patented in 1860, the year before the war began, and that was the Spencer rifle and the carbine, which is a shorter version of this. To load the Spencer, you turn the gun upside down. It took a real honest-to-goodness 52 caliber cartridge, but it's a rimfire. It's like a giant 22. They hadn't developed the center fire. To load it, you pull this door open, pulled it out, you dropped 7 bullets down into that chamber, stuck that back in, that's a spring, pushes them forward. To load the Spencer, all you have to do is pull the lever down, pull it back up, cock it, fire, go down, the hole's extracted, another bullet goes into place. Spencer tried to sell those to the United States government in 1861 when the war began. And the head of the U.S. Ordnance Department, General Ripley, turned him down. He said, I don't have enough wagons to carry all that ammunition out to the front if those fellows can shoot 7 times without reloading. Finally, in early 1863, Spencer walks into the White House carrying a rifle, ammunition to targets. He had an appointment with the President of the United States, and Lincoln tested it and said, I will see that the men get them. They also had revolvers. And most of the revolvers by Colt and Remington are rather simple little weapons. This one was invented by the Star Company. To load these, again, you had a paper cartridge with the powder and bullet in it you put in. Each one of those had to be stamped down into place. A little percussion cap had to be put onto each of the cylinders. Now, what made this an innovative thing was it was double action. Or if you slid this down the way you're supposed to fire it, that just cocked it, and the trigger is here in the back, and then you could very quickly shoot it. It's like a what they call
no floor,
set triggers.
no windows.
That very basically is what they had and how they fought.
The interior had to be completely rebuilt. And we go to back wing off to a small frame wing to have the kitchens, the bathrooms, storage areas.
Well, back in the 1860s, they didn't have the little band elastic like we have in our underwear. If you go to the girls' room, you would have to get in under all your clothing and then try to unbutton or untie something, which was impossible. So they just put 2 legs on a waistband. And if you go upstairs, you'll see some chamber pots up there. Chemise has a forerunner of our slips. And I don't know what time you came in, but the chemise has sleeves in them that catch the perspiration and the arms. They didn't have deodorants, they didn't have fragrance, and the perspiration, the acid was eaten out of the nice dresses. And you might say, well, why didn't they just wash their dresses? They washed them in boiling water and dry soap. You washed yourselves and wrinkled up. You washed the wool, they shrank. Your clothes were washed and totally found. There's a lot of colors weren't color fast at that time. So you really didn't wash your good outer clothing. You did have a winter dress that you would in the garden and that sort of thing, and you didn't wash it. But normally you would wash it. The next thing you needed was a corset. You were shireen was
Welcome, pick it up, turn it over, open it up, whatever to make photos, okay?
And this is basically an outdoor equivalent to the spinning wheel. And these have been around for thousands of years.
So this is so this was a drop spindle. So this is a good alternative to the large spinning wheel.
Correct.
Okay. Guys, this is Miss Molly. She's going to tell you all about this. Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it. Go for it.
All right. Well, this is the drop spindle. It's basically the outdoor equivalent to the spinning wheel. These have been around for thousands of years. And actually, if you look at the spinning wheel, you'll see a device on it that's horizontal, that's basically along the same lines as this. But basically, so all you do is you just take the wool and you spin it, and it has the same effect. You can eventually, once you have so much, you just pull it off of here.
Look, that chicken's been in the videos before, I'm pretty sure.
And wind it up a little bit, and you can eventually build your yarn, you know, all the way up here. And that's basically all there is to it.
So it remained a part of their herbal lore, even though it really wasn't the medicinal that they thought it had been. So I just... And this one was growing into the fort, the walls of the fort there. So, yeah, so I decided to dig it up and get some good tea making stuff, because as you can see, my apothecary's running a little low on it.
Is it common to grow around here?
Oh yes. Yeah, sassafras is real easy to tell because it's got 3 different types of leaves on it. It has one that looks just like this. It has another that's just 2 lobes, like mitten. And then the other is 3 lobes sticking up like that. So you'll have all 3 on the same tree. You'll, as soon as you step, well, that tall one sticking up over the gate there, that's a sassafras. You'll be able to recognize the 3 different types of leaves all on the same.
That was one.